Orla Dresden and Velora Ives were once inseparable, until one of them vanished and the other was left to bury a terrible secret. Now, decades later, a hidden grave and a trail of cryptic letters have exposed a chilling truth. One of them never left Black Hollow at all. As investigators unravel the past, they uncover a web of poison, betrayal, and an experiment that may have gone too far. But the most haunting question remains. If Orla spent years hiding a body, why has she now disappeared without a trace? Orla Dresden had always been an enigma in Black Hollow. A botanist with an extraordinary talent for cultivating rare and exotic plants, she preferred the company of her greenhouse over people. The townsfolk respected her knowledge, often coming to her for medicinal herbs or gardening advice, but they never truly knew her. She lived alone in a modest yet elegant house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by towering oak trees and a sprawling greenhouse filled with vibrant, almost unnatural flora. In the summer of 1998, Orla vanished without a trace. At first, no one in Black Hollow thought much of it. She was known to take occasional research trips, sometimes for weeks at a time, leaving only vague mentions of her destination. But as the weeks stretched into months, concern grew. She had left no notes, no travel itinerary, nothing to indicate she had planned to be away. Her house was eerily undisturbed. Her favorite book lay open on the coffee table, a teacup sat half full in the sink, and a pair of muddy boots rested by the back door as if she had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. When a neighbor finally reported her missing, the authorities conducted a search, but there were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no indication of foul play. The only thing of interest was her greenhouse, where her plants thrived despite her absence. Strange, the investigators thought, considering they should have wilted without care. Someone had been tending to them, but who? The case grew cold quickly. Without evidence of a crime, there was little that could be done. The official theory was that Orla had left town voluntarily, but those who knew her found that hard to believe. She had lived in Black Hollow for nearly 15 years, dedicating herself to her research. She wasn't the kind of woman to simply walk away. The mystery of her disappearance became nothing more than a whispered curiosity, another unsolved story in the town's quiet history. A year later, in the late autumn of 1999, a hiker named Callum Price was trekking through the dense forests just beyond the Dresden property when he stumbled upon something unusual. It was an overgrown garden, hidden deep within the woods. The plants were arranged with care, their colors vivid despite the fading season. It was as if someone had been tending to this secret garden in silence. What caught Callum's attention, however, was not the plants themselves, but something protruding from the soil near the center of the garden, a small, pale fragment catching the dim light filtering through the trees. Curiosity led him to brush away the dirt. What he found sent a cold wave of dread through him. It was a bone, long and slender, unmistakably human. The police were called immediately, and an excavation was launched. As the soil was carefully removed, the full extent of the discovery became clear. Beneath the neatly arranged flower beds lay more remains. The bones were old, their surfaces worn, but they were human without question. Some were scattered, while others seemed deliberately placed, as if buried with care rather than discarded. The forensic team determined that the remains had been there for years, possibly decades. But the most chilling revelation came when a single piece of jewelry was uncovered among the bones, a delicate silver ring with an inscription on the inside. It read, "Forever, V.I." Investigators scrambled to find out who the remains belonged to, but their immediate focus shifted to the obvious question. If Orla Dresden had disappeared without a trace, whose body was buried in her hidden garden? And more disturbingly, had she known it was there? The case that had once seemed like a simple disappearance had taken a horrifying turn. The discovery reignited interest in Orla's vanishing, turning it from a forgotten mystery into something far darker. If Orla hadn't simply left town, then what had really happened to her? And could she have taken a terrible secret with her? The investigation into the skeletal remains found in the hidden garden quickly turned toward Orla Dresden's past. The discovery of the engraved silver ring, Forever, VI, raised more questions than answers. Who was VI? Had Orla buried someone in her secret garden, or had she unknowingly lived above a hidden crime for years? Detectives began unraveling her history, searching for any connection to the initials. That was when they found mention of a woman named Velora Ives. Velora had been more than just a name in Orla's life. She had once been her closest companion. A decade earlier, the two had been nearly inseparable, conducting botanical research together and co-authoring scientific papers on rare and toxic plants. According to old records, Velora had suddenly left Black Hollow in 1,991 years before Orla's own disappearance. No one had questioned it at the time. People came and went from the quiet town, and Velora had always been a private person. There was no record of where she went, no forwarding address, no sign of her ever reaching out to Orla again. It was as if she had simply vanished. Investigators turned to Orla's research in the hopes of finding some clue about Velora's fate. That was when they made an unsettling discovery. Orla and Velora's final published work together had been an extensive study on botanical toxins, specifically a rare compound derived from a plant known as Aconitum noctis, or midnight monkshood. The plant was infamous for its ability to paralyze a victim, rendering them unable to move while remaining fully aware of their surroundings. It was a slow, excruciating way to die. The implications were horrifying. Had Orla and Velora's work crossed a dangerous line? Had they tested their findings in ways that went beyond the ethical limits of research? The discovery of human remains buried beneath Orla's carefully arranged plants suggested something sinister had taken place. Forensic experts confirmed that the bones found in the garden belonged to a woman, her approximate age matching Velora's when she had last been seen. But without any DNA to compare, there was no definitive proof that the remains were hers. If they were, it meant one thing. Velora hadn't left town at all. She had been buried there, hidden in plain sight among Orla's beloved plants. Investigators turned their attention back to Orla's house, hoping to uncover something that would confirm the link between her and the remains. They searched through her personal belongings, academic journals, and research notes, but nothing suggested foul play. If Orla had been involved in something sinister, she had left behind no obvious evidence. Then came a breakthrough. In a dusty filing cabinet in Orla's study, detectives found a locked drawer. After forcing it open, they uncovered a collection of old letters wrapped in twine. They were addressed to Orla, signed with the initials V. The letters painted an unsettling picture of Velora's state of mind in the months before her disappearance. She wrote of feeling watched, of sensing something lurking just beyond the edges of her vision. She described nights where she would wake up unable to move, her body frozen in place as if something had taken control of her. The most chilling letter was the last one, dated just weeks before she vanished. Orla, something is wrong. The plants, the research. I don't think we should continue. I feel it inside me. I wake up gasping for air, and I swear I can hear something whispering. Please, we have to stop before it's too late, before I disappear, too. Investigators were stunned. If Velora had feared for her life, why hadn't she gone to the police? Had she confronted Orla about her fears? And most importantly, had Orla silenced her? The discovery of the letters shifted the investigation into darker territory. Theories emerged suggesting that Orla might have used their research in ways even Velora hadn't anticipated. Had she experimented with their toxin on her own friend? Had Velora's suspicions been right all along? With no body ever found for Orla, a chilling possibility emerged. Had she become a victim herself, or had she simply disappeared to escape the consequences of a crime she had sworn to bury? The discovery of Velora Ives' letters only deepened the mystery surrounding Orla Dresden. Investigators now had reason to believe that Orla had been involved in something far darker than simple botanical research. But with her still missing and no definitive proof that the remains in the hidden garden belonged to Velora, they needed more evidence. The search of Orla's house had yielded some disturbing insights, but it wasn't until they took a closer look at the structure itself that they made their next chilling discovery. One of the forensic specialists noticed something strange about the layout of the house. The dimensions of the living room didn't match the floor plan on record. A section of the space appeared to be missing, as if a wall had been built to conceal something. Suspicious, the team began searching for hidden compartments or concealed doors. It didn't take long before they found what they were looking for. Behind a heavy bookcase, bolted to the floor and nearly impossible to move, was a hidden door. The lock was old and rusted, but once forced open, it revealed a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The basement had clearly not been touched for years. Inside, the space was unlike anything the investigators had expected. Rows of shelves lined the walls, each filled with neatly labeled glass jars. Some contained dried herbs and plants, but others held more unsettling contents: small bones, preserved insects, and even what appeared to be fragments of human hair. The collection was meticulous, almost ritualistic. At the center of the room stood a wooden work table covered in notebooks, faded photographs, and an assortment of old scientific tools. But it was the chest against the far wall that drew the most attention. The wood was warped, the hinges rusted, but it was locked. After prying it open, the officers stood in stunned silence. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, were personal items, things that didn't seem to belong to Orla. A locket with a faded photograph of a man, a cracked pocket watch frozen at exactly 3:17, and a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon. Each letter was signed by someone named T.B. None of the names matched anyone previously associated with Orla. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Who was Tobias Blaine, and why were his belongings hidden in Orla's secret basement? While forensic teams worked to uncover more about the objects in the chest, the investigators made an even more unsettling realization. The basement floor was made of stone, but there was a section where the tiles looked newer, less worn. When they removed them, they found what they had begun to dread: another burial site. Unlike the remains in the garden, these bones were more recent. Some were still wrapped in decayed fabric, the remnants of clothing barely holding together. The body had been positioned with care, almost reverently. It wasn't just a burial, it was a preservation. Tests would later confirm that the remains belonged to Tobias Blaine, a drifter who had been reported missing in 1996. He had never been connected to Orla before. The manner of his death was still unclear, but traces of plant-based toxins were found in the bones. It appeared he had been poisoned. With this new discovery, the case took a more horrifying turn. If Tobias had been buried beneath Orla's home, had she been responsible? And if she had hidden his body, did that mean she had done the same to Velora? The evidence painted a sinister picture, but one question remained unanswered. If Orla Dresden had been a killer, then where was she? Had she disappeared to evade justice? Or had someone else discovered her secrets and ensured she would never reveal the truth? The revelation of Tobias Blaine's remains beneath Orla Dresden's house sent shockwaves through the investigation. His death, confirmed to be the result of plant-based toxins, suggested something chilling. Orla had not only studied poisons, but may have used them. But Tobias's presence in Black Hollow was an even bigger mystery. There were no known connections between him and Orla, no records of him ever staying in town. He had simply vanished in 1996, his disappearance nothing more than a footnote in missing persons reports. How had he ended up buried beneath her home? As investigators worked to piece together the link between Tobias and Orla, forensic teams analyzed the letters found in the hidden basement. The correspondence between Orla and Tobias suggested something more than a casual acquaintance. He had written frequently, though his tone was desperate, at times pleading. He mentioned knowing something he shouldn't, something that terrified him. His final letter, dated just weeks before his disappearance, was brief, but unsettling. I wish I had never followed her. I should have never gone into the woods that night. It's not just her, I see that now. I see what you tried to hide, but it's too late for me. Maybe it's too late for you, too. Had Tobias discovered Orla's secret? Had he seen something in the woods, something that led to his murder? If so, what, or who, was he referring to? The more investigators dug, the more sinister the case became. Then came another break in the case. Financial records revealed that Orla had been making quiet, irregular withdrawals from her bank account for years. Small amounts, just enough to go unnoticed. But what stood out was where the money had been going. A second account, registered under a name that hadn't appeared in the case before, Velora Ives. Velora had supposedly left town in 1991. But if she had been gone, why had Orla been transferring money to an account in her name as recently as a year before she vanished? The account was still active, with small sums withdrawn in locations outside Black Hollow. The latest transaction? Just a week before Orla disappeared. The horrifying possibility that Velora had never truly left Black Hollow became unavoidable. Had she been hiding all this time? And if so, had she returned to silence Orla before her secrets could be uncovered? Investigators now had to consider that Orla was not the only one with blood on her hands. The pattern of disappearances surrounding her life could no longer be ignored. Tobias Blaine in 1996, Velora Ives in 1991. But the timeline stretched even further. Reports surfaced of a missing lab assistant from the university where Orla and Velora had conducted their early research. A woman named Sylvia Hale had gone missing in 1989. Her case unsolved, her name long forgotten. She had been involved in their toxin research. The pattern was undeniable. People connected to Orla kept vanishing. Had she silenced them one by one? Or had she been part of something larger? Something orchestrated by someone else? Then, an even more disturbing thought emerged. If Orla had been eliminating those who knew too much, had she finally become a victim herself? Or had Velora, having evaded suspicion for years, come back to finish what she started? The case had spiraled beyond a simple missing person investigation. It was a story of poison, hidden graves, and secrets buried beneath years of deception. But without Orla Dresden, there was no one left to explain what had truly happened. And if she had been killed, there was only one person who had a reason to make her disappear. Velora Ives was no longer just a missing person. She was a ghost haunting every corner of this mystery. And she was still out there. The search for Orla Dresden had started as a routine missing persons case, but it had unraveled into something much darker. The bodies of Tobias Blaine and the unidentified woman, strongly suspected to be Velora Ives, had turned her quiet home into a crime scene, and the hidden letters hinted at a history of fear, deception, and betrayal. But one question still loomed over the case. The question that tied everything together. Where was Orla Dresden? Investigators now believed Orla had not simply disappeared, but had been taken, or worse. If Velora Ives had survived all these years, evading detection while quietly withdrawing money from the account Orla had kept open for her, then she was more than just a victim. She was part of whatever had been happening in Black Hollow. But there was no record of her re-entering town. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and yet someone had been using that account. Then came the final, most disturbing discovery. A forensic examination of Orla's greenhouse turned up something no one had thought to check before: the soil itself. Underneath the beds of thriving plants, traces of human tissue were found. Not just remnants of old decay, but something more recent. Hair, fingernail fragments, tiny bone shards. The samples were analyzed, and the results were conclusive. The DNA was a match for Orla Dresden. At first, the revelation made no sense. Orla had been missing for over a year, but her remains, what little there was of them, had been decomposing for months, not years. This meant she had been alive for some time after her initial disappearance. But where had she been, and what had happened to her? The answer came when investigators widened their search beyond Orla's home and into the woods surrounding her property. Following faint but deliberate trails, paths that had been hidden by overgrowth, they stumbled upon something unexpected: another garden. This one was different from the one where Velora had been buried. It wasn't a hidden graveyard, nor was it a carefully cultivated research plot. Instead, it was something far stranger. The plants growing there were unnatural, their colors too vivid, their shapes twisted in unnatural ways. Among them, scattered haphazardly, were relics of Orla's life: her glasses, her notebooks, a scarf she had been known to wear. And at the center of it all, something worse: a single worn-down wooden chair, its legs bolted into the earth, its seat stained with something dark. Around it, the remnants of ropes, frayed from struggle. Orla had been here, held here, and whoever had kept her here had not let her leave alive. But the most chilling part was the discovery of footprints leading away from the scene. Footprints that suggested someone had been tending to this place, keeping it hidden even as investigators searched for answers. Someone had taken Orla, kept her in this strange, hidden place, and then, slowly, deliberately, allowed nature to reclaim her. The traces of her DNA found in the greenhouse soil had likely come from this very place. Her body had been disposed of in pieces, allowed to decay and merge with the earth. Velora Ives' name had haunted the investigation from the beginning, and now there was little doubt left. She had never truly disappeared. She had been watching, waiting, and when the time had come, she had made sure Orla paid the price for what had happened years ago. The final, haunting truth of the case was this: Orla Dresden had carried a terrible secret, one she had sworn to bury. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the past demands its due.